discuss how CFOs can leverage AI to help deliver the finance strategy. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jeremy Roberts, one of the senior directors from Global Research Technology Research Group Infotech. I've got Tom Reilly, who's the CEO of Beaconfield Partners, who are a procurement experts within the technology field, and I've got Nick Crowe, who's a technology executive working in large IT teams in Australia. So looking forward to a great conversation here. We'll have some audience members joining in as we go in here. Everybody's cameras and microphones are on mute. This is a recorded session, so if you want to drop off, feel free to do so. But we will have a questions and answers facility or function enabled there. So if you've got any questions as the presentation and discussion is going on, please feel free to type it into the text box and we'll pick it up as we go. So yeah, the format for today, we've got Jeremy Roberts from Infotech, who's going to give us a presentation showing us the latest insights from Infotech on AI, and with a particular sort of focus on the CFO, I suppose, but very, very general sort of overview of AI, what it is, what's automation, what's AI, what's real, what's hype. And then we'll have a look at some use cases for AI within the finance function. And then that'll take about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll kick into a facilitated conversation, questions and answers session with our panel of experts for about a half an hour. So we should be done in about an hour, and everybody can get back to work and start implementing the great insights that we see here today. So with that, I'll just introduce Jeremy, if you can jump up there and share your screen, and we'll kick into it.
Thank you, Brendan. Really appreciate it. All right, that should be visible to everyone, and I should be visible to everyone. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, thumbs up.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy morning to attend our talk. Hopefully this is insightful, and I imagine the panel discussion with my esteemed colleagues will be wonderful as well. I'm looking forward to that most of all. Just a quick introduction here. You might be wondering who I am. My name is Jeremy Roberts. I'm a senior workshop director, which basically means a professional meeting host, and I cover all sorts of topics in the infrastructure and operations space. But the thing that's really been animating people, the thing that's really getting people curious across every industry, every size, Fortune 500, right down to small nonprofits, is this whole artificial intelligence thing. So I've been doing a lot of that lately. In fact, just this morning I was telling the folks that I spent some time with an architecture firm working through some of the elements of their AI strategy. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of the insights. I am Canada-based, if the accent didn't give that away. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, that's it. The company that I work for, Infotech Research Group, has hundreds of analysts. We cover all sorts of topics, and we actually have a dedicated AI research team, which is a luxury that many organizations don't have. So I'm excited to share some of their insights today. I didn't gather all of this on my own. We make money by selling workshops, workshop accessories, as I like to call them, on a variety of topics. And of course, AI has been a very big seller for us lately. And we have what we call an AI research center that rounds up use cases, vendor evaluations, interviews with practitioners, and with people who sell, vend, evaluate AI products professionally. So it's worth checking out if that's something that you're interested in pursuing as part of your professional life. So one of the first questions that people ask is, what is AI? And everyone has an answer to this, and all of the answers are right, because AI is such a vague and a nebulous topic. But I'm going to attempt to dispel some myths and produce a defensible definition of artificial intelligence. And I've got that on my next slide here. So what is AI? Well, we define it very generically as human intelligence mimicked by machine algorithms. So in the 1990s, you might remember Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, faced off against IBM's Deep Blue. AlphaGo, which was a Google program, faced off against a world master in the game Go, which is exponentially more complicated than chess, or so I've been told. If you're a fan of Jeopardy, Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter, two eminent Jeopardy players, faced off against IBM's Watson in 2011 and were destroyed. It turns out computers are very good at retrieving information. So artificial intelligence, of course, does things that we would expect people to do. And that's such a vague definition that it's almost not useful. So maybe we go a little bit deeper. You might have heard the concept machine learning before. Machine learning is everywhere. If you take a photo with your iPhone, it's using computational photography and machine learning to layer a whole bunch of images to produce artificial bokeh and things like that. Machine learning is basically the ability to make projections, to do predictive analytics based on a data set. So spam detection, preventative maintenance. Microsoft Outlook thinks that that email in your inbox is fake or spam or fraud or something like that based on its previous data set. And then deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, has been really exciting lately because it's been used in these transformer-based models like ChatGPT. And of course, the relationships between parameters in a neural network have allowed us to do things like classify images extremely effectively, recognize faces. When you board a flight in the United States these days, you don't have to show any ID because they scan your face on the way in. That's pretty amazing. And then, of course, there's generative AI. And so Brendan posed a really interesting question in the teaser material for this roundtable and also right at the beginning of our session this morning, which is what's the difference between AI and automation? Because when I talk to people about AI implementations, very often they'll tell me about things like, auto filling out timesheets or routing tickets via, a service desk or, flagging documents for review or things like that. And I'll say that's a great thing and you should do it, but it's just a traditional automation. Right? So what's the difference between that and something that's truly groundbreaking or something that merits this distinction, admittedly vague distinction, as artificial intelligence? And this graphic across the bottom of the slide, I think, illustrates the point fairly well. So when we think about a traditional program, we have data and we have a rule, right, an instruction set, a program. We apply some compute power to it and we get an output. So we say, here is everything that's a muffin, sort all of these pictures into things that are muffins and things that aren't based on this very specific tag. The computer does it. If you don't tag something as a muffin, the computer doesn't qualify, the image as a muffin, right? Very basic. Think a lot of the work that you do in Excel, if functions, formulae, that sort of thing. It's very rules oriented. We understand exactly how it works and we can break down the specific steps in the process. And an automation is like this. If X, then Y, right? And it can get very complicated. I once wrote a 36 deep nested if function in Excel because I just had nothing better to do that day. Machine learning, which is the most prominent subset of AI that we talk about today, sort of flips the script a little bit. So you get data and you get an output, and you actually apply computing power to generate an algorithm that can help us reproduce something. So if we tag enough images as muffins and then feed them into a program, we can produce a program or an algorithm that effectively can tell when something is a muffin or when it isn't. That's a silly example, but it's one that I saw early in my AI career, so it stuck with me. Maybe a better example is when you log onto a website and they show you an image and they say, identify all the stop signs or identify all the images with traffic lights. You're actually training a model to help drive a car, right? That's not rules-based. That's you contributing to the corpus of data that will then feed into a predictive analytics model that will allow a car to know when it needs to stop. So it's pretty high-stakes stuff. And of course, AI performs very well when the algorithms are solid. That's what the computer scientists over at Microsoft and OpenAI are doing. When the accelerators are useful, that's what NVIDIA is building in their GPUs. Their GPUs do the right kind of math, for lack of a better word, to be really effective with AI, which is why they're worth $4 trillion. And of course, when you have the data that you need to be successful. And so many organizations like media companies and companies like Twitter or Reddit are sitting on these huge repositories of human information that's been generated by humans, I should say, that is therefore useful to them. So this is very valuable. I think there's a lot of opportunities here, but it's something that's new to a lot of organizations. So we did a survey. We call it our Future of IT survey. It informs our trends. We asked hundreds of people in IT, mostly at the director level, where they are on AI strategy. And the vast majority of them, so 67% give or take, are sort of in that early stage, and relatively few, even earlier this year, have that strategy in place right now. We argue, based on our experience and based on the data that we've gathered, that that number needs to decrease, and the number of folks who actually have a corporate-wide AI strategy in place, or even a strategy for certain business units in place, that needs to go up, because ultimately this technology is potentially very disruptive and not in a positive sense. It can create a lot of issues. It can bring the regulatory hammer down on you if it's not used effectively. And of course, it can create confusion. And it doesn't always work the way we intend it to. I'm sure you've heard of hallucinations and bias and deep fakes and cybersecurity issues that have been related to AI. So having a good, coherent approach to AI, I think, is very valuable. And it's something that we strive to help our membership accomplish. And there needs to be some strategization. Is that a word, strategization? Because the AI ecosystem, of course, is growing and changing in real time in front of us. So there's all sorts of AI applications that are available out there from the usual suspects like Google and Salesforce and Amazon and Microsoft. But there are also other platforms that you can use to build AI solutions. So OpenAI offers them. You can use the machine learning service in Azure. You can build your own solution on top of Gemini and Google. Anthropic is a sort of a startup that's gleaned a ton of attention and derived a ton of value for investors on the basis of their Claude chatbot that's it's received investment from Google and Amazon. Hugging Face, a company named after an emoji that nevertheless has derived a ton of success, is a platform for artificial intelligence solutions. You can use Stability, Midjourney. You can incorporate these into applications. On the data side, all the usual players are here: Snowflake, Mosaic, Salesforce, of course, for customer relationships management. You've got all your big hyperscalers for system software. I won't get too far into the Kubernetes or Terraform or anything like that. Not super relevant to CFOs, but on the infrastructure side, that's very useful. And then, of course, all sorts of infrastructure-related solutions like Amazon S3, which is a storage service. In fact, S3 means simple storage service. Microsoft's Azure, which many of you are probably customers of. You get the bills for it. They all offer all sorts of AI-enabled infrastructure. And so when we think about how to make sense of this growing agglomeration of artificial intelligence solutions, we think, well, okay, well, where are people actually going to get their sort of governance ideas from? How do we know when to use Hugging Face versus a Meta model versus something from Amazon or Microsoft? And we think that a lot of organizations actually aren't really sure where to go. So in many cases, they use advisory services like ours, or they use the vendors themselves, which of course is a bit of a conflict of interest. Sometimes they go straight to the standards bodies. So NIST does a brisk business in AI and quantum standard building and all sorts of other standards as well. It's the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in the United States. It's a wing of the Department of Commerce, actually. They might look to internal experts. In some cases, they don't look to govern it at all, which is problematic, but thankfully that's a fairly small number. And then, of course, a relatively smaller proportion of organizations use no listed solution here. So we're happy to see that we captured most folks. And it's important. So we've already determined that the tool is very powerful. It's very different. We've determined that not a lot of folks have their strategy in place. They haven't put that governance together necessarily effectively. We've determined that they're using sort of the vendors themselves in a lot of cases. They're external consultants to help them put that governance together. But you need to make sure you're getting your expertise in the right place, because the reality is that the approach that regulations have taken in the AI world is, of course, very different depending on where you go. Right, so this is an example of a subset of countries that have AI regulations, and we've actually categorized their regulatory approaches. So the EU and Canada and Australia are risk and rights-based, which is maybe a little bit more moderate. The United States is very market-driven. So the Biden administration released an executive order, for example, limiting some of the requirements for, or introducing some requirements, I should say, for very large AI organizations. But of course, we've seen that big tech has been rather powerful in American politics. The UK, innovation-driven, and there's all sorts of different regulations that might be useful for you to look into here. So depending on where you do business, you might be interested in retaining a copy of this slide, just so you can get a view as to what you need to think about here. And these regulations are changing every day. I always tell folks, if you're going to use AI for anything that could be controversial, you should be abreast of the changes in the regulatory environment, because it's entirely possible that they'll pull that out from under you. If you did a facial recognition pilot in Illinois, odds are that was now illegal after they passed a rule prohibiting the use of facial recognition, just as an example. So how can you do this in practice, right? How can you support it? Well, this is an example of what's called a reference architecture from Microsoft, and it demonstrates how you can incorporate something like the OpenAI service into your app workflow, essentially, right? So you've got the user experience on a smartphone up front, you've got your app server, your orchestrator, and then essentially you can call the Azure OpenAI service, which is powered by GPT 4.0 or 4 Omni, I think now. You can query your own data. You can turn up all sorts of relevant information. You can feed it back to the user based on the prompt, and it will have a wrapper that looks a lot like an application that was built natively within your organization, right? So this is an example of using your own data. You can use ChatGPT to communicate with the data, returning the most relevant data, prompting it with ChatGPT, including a citation, previewing the file, returning a summary, and it can support multiple languages. So when we think about what people are using this for, there's a whole bunch of different contexts here, right? So we've got content generation. That's a huge one. We love the idea of content generation. So that's creating conversational responses or photorealistic art if you're a marketer, for example. You can access your enterprise's data. That was Google's mission. They just wanted to make it possible for people to find things that were already on the internet, and they turned into one of the biggest companies in the world. It's amazing how difficult that process actually is. There's data analysis, making heads or tails of the information that you've actually effectively retrieved. And then, of course, code generation. So anybody here work in Excel? I imagine probably, given that there's a lot of folks with accounting backgrounds. I know that when I need an obscure Excel function, my first stop is a large language model because they tend to work very well. So how do we approach this? How do we identify a use case? Well, something that we do is we look at a capability map. So we want to understand, and this is an example for a bank, but we have these for all sorts of verticals. We want to understand specifically what it is you're looking to accomplish. We want to identify those capabilities, and then we want to work through them and figure out the areas where a large language model or an AI-powered solution can be useful or effective. So an example here might be in enterprise architecture, or human resources, or document review for legal, and so on, right? We want to understand what the different functions are doing and how AI can be useful to them. And typically, they'll fall into a handful of categories. So we would want AI to support things like operational efficiency. We'd want it to support business growth, customer experience, the employee experience, reduce our risk. ESG is a big one if you've got a regulatory obligation, as some folks do, to contribute or to identify how you're contributing to positive social outcomes. AI can be useful for that. I pulled out a couple of accounting use cases from some of the research that we had done. So there are vendors out there like Truewind that offer a digital accounting assistant. So they do automatic transaction classification. They facilitate month-end close. They help you review documents. CXO Nexus provides visibility into vendor spend. That's their whole thing. They use AI to enable that. Of course, there's the standard use cases like financial dashboards and reporting, document generation, assistance with data science and Excel capabilities. You ever wanted to learn Python but didn't have the time? Now you don't have to. There's a service out there that knows Python incredibly well and is more than happy to listen to your amateur questions. And then, of course, administrative tasks, right? Everybody at every level, but especially at the executive level, has a lot on their plate. And if we could whittle down the size of the challenge, that could be quite effective for us. And so one of the things that we offer as a research firm is a use case library across all sorts of different verticals. So I've just pulled banking as an example here, and we've got a whole bunch of relevant use cases. I think there's 12 in this deck, which you'll all get a copy of if you're interested. But there are examples of things like financial education or customer segmentation or digital attendance. An ATM could be a virtual teller in the future, which seems a little weird, but I bet ATMs seemed weird to people, in the 1940s. They can detect fraud. AI is remarkably effective at learning when something is atypical. They can flag compliance issues. They can facilitate customer analysis. They can help you deal with self-help solutions for customers. There's all sorts of things that AI can do. So these are just some examples. So what does it look like in practice? Well, at Infotech, we offer a series of workshops that cover the AI strategy or the approach that you might take to adopting artificial intelligence. And our flagship is, of course, building a strategy and roadmap, which looks like this. We can make it less purple if it's too purple. We had a debate about the level of purpleness when we were putting this together. But what we do is we walk through this 7-step process, right? Identify a strategy that is aligned with your overall organizational strategy. We want to help you do this responsibly. So we talked about regulations, but you also have social obligations, and there's reputational impacts to using AI inappropriately. Identifying some of those initiatives that will help you identify those goals and align with them effectively. Identify some use cases that are going to be valuable to you in your role or to your various stakeholders. Make sure we pick the most valuable and feasible ones, or at least the ones that sit correctly on the axes, respective axes, and prioritize those so that we're actually getting something useful out of it. We don't want this to be, the late 90s, everything's a .com company and only 1% of them actually do something valuable. We want to prioritize those use cases and then come up with a list of next steps with agreed upon stakeholders. So that's typically the approach that we take. We also offer material on implementing your AI solution, on governing your AI solution, and of course on selecting AI vendors. And so if anybody has any questions about that, myself or Brendan would be more than happy to chat with you about it. And with that, I think I'll throw it back over to Brendan to introduce us to our next stage.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jeremy. That was an excellent. Can everybody hear me now? Okay, yeah. Excellent. So, yeah, Jeremy, you absolutely met the brief of what we asked you to give us a whirlwind tour of. So I think that's given us a good overview of what AI is, and then at the end there, starting to get into some of those specific use cases that I think are very relevant to CFO communities. So, as you said through the presentation, we'll share that deck, and there are many other use cases and relevant industry bits of research that Infotech can share as well. So, as Jeremy said, just reach out to myself or Jeremy, and we can see what we can do around that. I'm going to ask our two panelists to join us in now. So, Tom and Nick, if you could just knock on your camera and we'll get you spotlighted for everybody. And spotlight, yeah, and then Tom, spotlight. Very good. So I think we just have 4 cameras in the middle of the room, right? Everybody see that? Excellent. Okay, so look, obviously Jeremy has given a bit of an introduction. I'll ask Nick and Tom to give a broader introduction to themselves when they get to speak. But very simply, Tom is the CEO of a company called Beaconfield, who are procurement experts within certainly the Australian market, with Southeast Asia. I know Tom does a lot of work there and other parts of the world, and working between the vendors and buyers, particularly within the technology space. Nick is a technology executive. I first came across Nick when I was working with Ausgrid in Sydney in Australia, one of the largest electricity network providers. So Nick has a lot of experience going back into Telstra and places like that, but I'll let him explain it a little bit further. So yeah, so the purpose of the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, we'll see how it goes, is to have a conversation around what we're seeing out in the market, leveraging off some of the insights there that Jeremy has provided. But really, what are you guys seeing out in the market? And obviously we've got a CFO community here. We'll try and keep it to that focus. I think the first sort of real sort of trigger point for me around AI came about, I would say, about 13, 14 months ago, when I was working in an IT area. CIO came into the meeting room, and he said he just bumped into the CEO in the lift, and the CEO had asked him, "What's our AI strategy?" And the CIO kind of didn't really have an AI strategy. But what it got me thinking about is the reason CEO was asking CIO that, and then the CIO was asking his leadership team that, is because it's coming from higher up the chain. It's coming from the boards. It's coming from all of the vendors, the Gartners, the Infotechs. Every product provider that's out there has got AI wrapped into their marketing blurb now, and they've all got a perspective on it, and it is the big thing. So there's a lot of hype out there, but it is driving the question, what is our AI strategy? And as Jeremy talked right at the end there, we've got a bit of a process that we can help organizations with in terms of putting together an AI strategy. looks like from the graph you showed earlier on, 2/3 of organizations either don't have a strategy or they're kind of like just starting on one. So that's a big gap in terms of what the technology providers out there are putting onto the market, and how organizations are in terms of their ability to sort of adopt it and adapt to a changing world. So look, hopefully the conversation goes around that. How can CFOs start to get a strategy in place and make it work for their organization? So, Tom, I'm going to ask you the first question
Yep.
because just because you're in that sort of space between governments
Yep.
or sorry, the buyers and the sellers, and particularly within the government space. So, yeah, if you could just share us your sort of thoughts on what you're seeing out in the market, that would be great.
Yeah, again, most of my clients are in the public sector, so federal, state, and local government, plus other industries like health, education, transport, utilities. And I think the emphasis that Jeremy was putting on the strategy side of it is a really important point, because I think most organizations are grappling with, certainly within the government and within the public sector, are grappling with how to govern AI. I think that's where most people are. When you walk around the halls, everybody's experimenting with Copilot or ChatGPT or all these great things, but really at the top level, it's at the strategy stage. And I think it's a very important one, for the government, particularly, not only the governance of AI, but the governance, the related governance of data and personal information protection and cybersecurity and all these overlapping areas. But there is some fundamentally, I think, strong reasons to look at it in this way. In some ways, we may hear a government example and we say, God, they've just banned the use of ChatGPT or Copilot or one of these things. But there are some real horror stories already. We have a case in Victoria in the children's court where the children's court just banned the use of generative AI in a very knee-jerk reaction. But what it was reacting to was a case where a caseworker had put together case notes using, I think, ChatGPT, and when it got to the judge, it misrepresented the perpetrator in a domestic abuse case. So it put a very, very abusive parent as a caring and loving father, which could result in mistrial, could result in child's life at risk, or at least their mental health and all those things. So there are some really serious thoughts about how we use it and govern it. But I think on really on the face of it, that really is because the whole generative AI has put the power in people's hands. For most government agencies, artificial intelligence has been in use for the last 20 years, whether it's from threat detection or facial recognition or whatever it is. So a lot of this, I think, is way overdue. And I also think there's a particularly Australian angle to this. Don't let the accent fool you. I'm an Australian citizen. We basically like to follow rules, and I think one of the things that Jeremy also highlighted is that really organizations are looking to government and others for the rules. Once we get the safe rule set, then we can innovate, then we can develop, then we can move forward. So I think, to your question, we're in this first phase, Brendan, where you'd be amazed how many questions we get in the last 24 months, and what's our AI strategy, what should our AI strategy be? And we see a lot going on. That's what we see on the buyer side. On the seller side, it's there's a huge amount of hype. I think we're finally seeing the hype die down, and I'm happy to get into that in a little more detail, because we can get into some of the things we're seeing in finance with some of the big vendors.
Yeah. Yeah, that slide that Jeremy had with all the different regions and their different approaches from legislative perspective around AI protection and safeguards and safe AI adoption, very, very real, I think, and particularly, as you say, within the Australian market, we're quite
Or
compliant,
psyche.
and you're
Yeah.
waiting for the rules, I think, is probably a
Yep.
really good description of where we're at. Nick, did you want to jump in? I'm keen to sort of explore. You're very much at the coal face of technology within large corporates, and I think the experience of recently getting into Copilot a little bit and seeing what it can do. You've had a sort of hands-on experience there working with organizations on that. Did you want to just talk a little bit about what you're seeing out there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brendan, and good morning, everybody. So for those that I haven't met, my name's Nick Crowe. I lead large transformations in the IT space, both domestically and globally. So I've seen a lot of change over the years, as Tom started to mention, things around automation and digitization and then machine learning and now artificial intelligence. These things have been around for many years, and we've dealt with the change, both domestically in our own business and on an international stage. So I've seen it in industries such as telecoms, utilities, transportation, and finance. And some of the things that we've already heard from Jeremy and Tom, I just want to capitalise on those first because they are important points. The first one is the strategy. So your AI strategy should support your business and corporate strategy and not the other way around. It's really important to get that clear up front. I'm gonna flip all the way to Tom's other comment around the use of AI. At the same time as we're dealing with the strategy and how it connects to our corporate strategy, it's really important to deal with the employee and stakeholder mindsets. You need to get them on board early. And as we're hearing today, what is AI and what it's not, it's really important that the employees hear that too, because there's a general fear amongst the employees that it reduces jobs, that it takes all the smart work away, and they'll be pushed down into the organisation somewhere else operationally, and nothing could be further from the truth. And it's that level of education around what AI is and its uses. So let me just roll into that question, Brendan, about Copilot and ChatGPT. So a really interesting journey here locally, actually, in Australia, was a utilities company. And they went on the journey of starting to build that AI strategy. And quite quickly, the use cases built out to 15, then 30, then 60. And to maintain a quorum of what was actually the outcomes they were looking to get was very difficult. But along the way, we had companies like Microsoft deploying Copilot. ChatGPT appeared in search engines. It was easy to use and accessible, but the employees and our customers didn't have the knowledge to use it. So they were poking at it and asking questions. Then probably the worst case scenario is there was critical or sensitive data that was being used in open ChatGPT environments. That was just due to a lack of understanding and knowledge of how things worked. So that quickly turned into, how do you close things down? The example that I had was, rather than close it down, was the company thought, well, part of the strategy should be, how do we use it and adopt it? Because it's out there and our employees and customers are asking us, what are you doing with it? Back to your point earlier about your CIO and CEO conversation. And that's happening all over the place. So the first thing to do was to reconnect with the market, and in this case, particularly Microsoft, and understand what the tool actually does. And then allow the employees to utilize that tool in a safe environment and give them some structure. So some confidence about what it does, and actually start with enabling them to reduce some of the more minute and meaningless tasks in their job day to day. I think, Brendan, we had a great conversation over the last couple of days as I was working through something else, and I was just sharing with a group of people how they were building a presentation, and it was taking them days and days of effort, a group of them, to put this presentation together, real time online, just assisted them after they provided just a little bit of input as to what they were looking to get out of it, and built the presentation in a matter of minutes. And then they could go on and work from there. So I guess you call that blank page or writer's cramp, exercise, but at the base level. So from there, my sort of I'll leave it here, Brendan, in answering your question. We did a very large customer and employee experience program. So much feedback that it was it could have been easily overwhelming. As the HR team started their journey through an exercise template of working out what was said and what the meaning behind it was, we used AI to generate the outcome. And again, within the day, we had our better understanding of the input that was provided. We had a plan going forward, and the top 3 items we needed to address and why, which was really important. So,
there's a couple of things that have come out from that, and Jeremy, I'll throw to you now in 2 seconds. But just that idea of using AI or technology even to replace smart work, and that it's not going to affect people's jobs. I'd like to dig into that a little bit, because I personally feel there's a lot of disruption coming because of this. I think there's a second thing that you talked about there about engagement with people through the process. So making sure that everybody's on board and they understand it, and that they understand the benefits as well as the risks around it. I think there's another bit there around, is AI actually the right tool to solve the problem? And I know, Jeremy, one of the decks that I've gone through with from Infotech talks about that sort of decision process, looking at what is the problem we're trying to solve first, and is AI the solution? And oftentimes it's not the right solution for us. Often there's another solution. So over all of this thing, there's a thing in my head which goes, is this wave of technology change different to previous waves of technology change? And is the approach to it different? Do we need to take a different approach to this as leaders within organizations? So I'll throw that out, but sorry, Jeremy, I know you were going to respond to something Nick was saying there. If you can, over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I would love to tackle that question too. So maybe I'll make my bad joke. I was just going to say, Nick, I bet the output looked very clean too, because ChatGPT or Copilot can throw together a PowerPoint in a second that looks like it took you hours. And to your point about the drudgery, I allow AI to make paintings so that I can spend more time unclogging drains, right? That's nobody ever said that. But it's a real thing, and I think that dovetails nicely into your question there, Brendan, which is really, when we think about, I guess, the value of artificial intelligence, right? The way that it's providing something unique and distinct, is it fundamentally different from transitions that we've seen historically? And so I actually gave a presentation on this because I'm a weird person. It was actually about agricultural mechanization in the United States in the early 20th century. And the thing that really jumped out at me was that it took about 60 odd years for tractors to take over from animals. Right. And in that time, the portion of the population of the United States that worked in agriculture dropped precipitously. We didn't produce any less food in the United States, but the number of people it took to actually produce the food was different. And unemployment wasn't massively structurally changed. It's not like everybody who used to be a farmer or whose parents were farmers was just unemployed because we brought tractors in. The key difference, I think, with AI is that it's happened so quickly. So like, ChatGPT came along in November of 2022, right? And then if you were a translator or a transcriber or an illustrator for, online avatars, which is that's a small but, maybe lucrative profession for some people, just gone like that. That didn't happen with the tractor. That didn't happen with the car. So I'm not going to say that, a whole bunch of people are going to be laid off tomorrow, but I suspect that the key difference is velocity. OpenAI can go from 0 to 100 million users in a month. That's not a thing that we used to be able to do, but we built out distribution networks that can produce changes that are so significant that we might not be able to deal with them. We had time to process historically. So that's my answer to your question, and I'll throw it to my colleagues on the panel here. I'm super curious what you guys think about this.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was making. I think it's the speed of the change that it is going to disrupt. The period of disruption in the agricultural sector in the United States in the 1920s, right? Took 20 years or whatever to get to that point. I think it's happening so much faster now. And this specifically for a CFO audience here is it's really important to help manage the risks and the transition of your organization through that, and the transition of your people through that process. And there's a care factor in there that really needs to be part of the decision making process. Tom, did you want to
Oh yeah,
join in
look,
now?
I think there are some, similarities with, previous, technology waves. I think what we're seeing is I'm a little skeptical though about the speed, Brendan, at which things will go. I think there's a lot of very obvious uses of AI, especially of, the new generative AI tools. There's some very, very obvious ones, but there's also some less obvious and more profound changes, and there's also some foundational things that need to be, put in place. So, for example, I think there's a massive stumbling block that we all have at the moment, which is our data quality. Before we go anywhere with AI, there's sort of years of rectification, I believe, in most Australian organizations to really get the data right. So the tool is out there in people's hands, and it could be, if we use the Industrial Revolution, Jeremy's example, it could be that, the automobiles are there, but not all the roads are built yet, and certainly the Autobahn hasn't been built yet. So I think there is a huge amount of infrastructure that needs to go in place, and that also relates to compute power. It relates to, a lot of other things that are associated with this. This next revolution. And I've subscribed to the latter analogy, which says that, when something of a lower value gets automated, people start doing things of a higher value, grab the next, rung on the ladder. As far as I know, the Industrial Revolution happened very quickly, right? The Luddites were being jailed and sent to Australia, transported to Australia pretty quickly on, and that was a pretty severe case where people were ending up in prison because of unemployment and all those horrible things. So I think there's always the aspect of some disruption. My view on it is that we have a long way to go before we've got all the pieces in place for anything other than the really obvious uses to be taken up.
Can you
Yeah, I
think of
think
a more reasonable punishment for breaking a stocking frame than transportation to Australia?
Yeah, look, I've literally my wife's relatives were sent here for that exact reason, for destroying a loom at the age of
there
at
you
the age
go.
of
Well,
13. So these things
that's
these
amazing.
things happen. Yeah, these
yeah,
things happen.
Yeah, a
yeah, I
couple
think
of things that come to mind there, Tom, with compute power. So as we talk about an AI strategy, so are there some fallouts in
Yes,
technology and in the assets themselves. So
that's right.
there's it was a fairly large bubble only 6 months ago as the end user
Exactly.
compute world tried to deal with, well, where's that compute power going to sit?
Yep.
And there's a theory that it actually needs to sit at the end user, on the PCs and on the phones and the tablets, etc., which puts a really big load on companies and on the CFO, thinking, well, which direction do I go? Then do I have the data on site, or do I have it in the cloud, and how's that going to work, and how do I secure that? So that sort of come to mind, but not to get too far down off the track. To your other point, I think fundamentally this thing is shifting, and it's shifting quickly, and it's happening around us. And there's some really good examples of it, like chatbots, when we're
That's
either
right.
chatting online to get support, or we're on a call, and you don't know right out of the gate that you're not talking to a person, or particularly chatting to a person. It's incredible how quickly that is progressing. User and customer behavior, the algorithms behind that have moved from just learning into artificial intelligence. The knowledge they now have, or we now have, on our customers and our employees, and this is not Big Brother watching, but a point in case, an example was recently in a employee experience program. We needed to know information about not what was being said, but why it was being said. What was causing the fundamental concern? So we were actually fixing the root cause of the problem. But my favourite one, and touch wood, fraud detection. I love those calls that I get from the bank every now and again. Your credit card is been disabled. Well, the first time it happened, obviously anxiety and anger. What do you mean? And now it's like you couldn't shut it down fast enough. It's fantastic, but it's even progressed from there now in that there's no need to shut it down. I know what's going on. It's just amazing, those technologies.
Just on that fraud detection, I saw a YouTube video where I think it was one of the UK telecoms has produced an AI bot that it's effectively an avatar, and it's just as good quality as our pictures here on screen of an elderly woman who is basically a bot that is you can deploy against one of the scammers when they call, and it just wastes their time. The purpose of the bot is to waste the scammer's time. It's excellent. Well, we're looking. Tom, you talked about the data being an issue, and the reason why I'm picking in on this is, ACCA's professional accounting body, the research that has come out recently on finance evolutions for the next decades. They did in conjunction with or in association with PwC and the Chartered Accountants of ANZ, talks about a specific niche sort of value proposition for the CFO and the finance community to step into that data quality space and to create the integrity around and trust, more importantly, around data. So is that the opportunity? How are CFOs actually taking up that and with their finance team? Are you seeing that?
Look, well, I think at the very beginning, you were giving the story of walking to the lift and talking to the CIO about, the CEO talking to the CIO about what the strategy is. And I think, just like cybersecurity, every CEO until recently has looked at it as the IT guy's job, right? So AI is the IT department's job, cybersecurity is the IT department's job, data is the IT department's job. And I think, hopefully we all realize now that with something like cybersecurity, it's all of our, it's all of our jobs. And if we think especially about how the finance function took the lead, for example, in phishing fraud and all these financial scams that were going on. I think it's the same issue with data. The finance function. If we really start talking about being the people who are helping, with predictive analytics and starting to really find patterns in the business that are different, it's really about taking a role in defining that data, and it's not just the IT organization's job, it's the finance organization that can start to really move the needle. I think we're going to find it's going to be everybody's job to improve the quality of data, but when it comes to information that drives the business, I could very easily see the finance organization taking that role. And to your point, are there examples of organizations that that have been for a while? Data and analytics has generally been owned by finance professionals in a lot of organizations, a lot of finance-led organizations. So I think that's a big part of the changing role of finance. I saw that research you mentioned from the ACCA, and I couldn't agree with it more. I think the other thing that's interesting there is earlier I was kind of hinting at the idea of that what's going on within the vendor community, and the vendor community, the technology vendors have really seen an exponential change in the way they pitch AI and machine learning and all that. It's incredible. I was telling the story the other day of we had a pitch from SAP. This was a part of a big SAP Rise move to the cloud implementation for one of the government agencies, one of the big ones. And at the very beginning of the presentation, the SAP guys said, "Would you mind if we spend a little bit of time talking about autonomous finance?" And then they presented for 30 minutes on automation in the finance function, and everybody was swept away by it. It was absolutely, the CFO, everybody who had a accounting or finance bent in the room was just swept away, and it's all they wanted to talk about. So in the same way, I think the finance profession had to become experts in finance systems, ERP systems, all of that. It's the same thing. It's really about understanding how this will work. So we see that from SAP. Salesforce is doing some massive things around Agent Force, which is their automation tool, and every vendor presentation now is becoming pretty much an AI presentation. It's kind of, there was a little, it was a little bit trite, and there was a lot of cases where it was just talking about it for the sake of it. But I think now it's becoming a lot more real, and we're starting to see these offerings being built into these products.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So you've sparked a thought process in my head here about the role of a CFO, and how that's evolved. And there's something about the responsibility or obligation, I think, on a CFO to ensure that they elicit the information out of vendors. Like the vendors have value to offer, so they may come to you with a little pitch around something, right? Their new widget, but
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
you've got that opportunity in the half an hour that you're with them to really understand what the value proposition of this product or service that has landed on your desk and how that fits in with your overall organization. And to one of Nick's points earlier on, how is this connected to strategy? So therefore the CFO is in that pivotal, not a gatekeeper, that's not the right word. It's that you're actually have to have a consultative approach around this and understand how what's presented in front of you is fits in with your organizational strategy, and take an optimistic view or an expansive view rather than a close down this sales guy view on things.
Well, that's
Really
right.
understand where the value is, and dig into it.
like you need like you need to do with as a finance professional with the rest of technology, right?
Yes.
You need to be literate in it, need to be able to do it. I think the Gartner statistic is something like 60% of all technology projects are led by a business person, right?
Mm.
A non-technologist. And I think we see a lot more CFOs taking that role and leading these transformations, which include
Mm.
AI now. So
That's right.
same kind
ACCA
of thing.
called it out in that same report about how, as the responsibility or the funding for technology improvements, whether it's in AI or otherwise, where they get given it to business, actually incumbent on the CFO to understand the business case and the delivery of the benefits of that really clearly, and tracking the benefits, and that's actually delivering what it was promised to do. We've got about 5 minutes here. Jeremy, just I'd like to give you sort of 2 or 3 minutes here just to maybe wrap this up from Infotech's perspective and in AI, and what you're seeing out there, and particularly, I suppose, around the CFO. And then we'll just talk about that last piece around the strategy. Where do listeners, the audience, go to get a strategy in place so they become not a statistic that adds up to 2/3 of people who don't have one yet? So yeah, over to you there, just very quickly.
Fair enough, and thank you for the opportunity. So one thing, and I really appreciate your perspectives, Nick and Tom, and thank you for sharing. I feel like I've learned a lot from this, so thank you for the invite, Brendan. One thing that's stuck with me as I've been doing this work is how much needs to be done to get it right, if that makes sense. So, you referred to an excellent metaphor, right? The cars are there, the roads aren't ready. The number of times that I've gone to, say, a CIO, right, somebody in a technology leadership role, and they've been very gung-ho about AI, and they've told me, oh, we're going to pull this out of our ERP and this out of our CRM, and we're going to generate this report with this data. And then somebody on the finance side comes in and goes, nope, you're not doing that. There's a
Yeah,
regulatory reason. We actually
that's
don't
right.
know what number is real, by the way, on
That's
the
right.
back end. We just, we use this database, but we're not sure. Like, there's a whole bunch of it's technical debt that's been accrued over time as more and more technical solutions have been implemented. And so I see the role of the CFO in several ways. One, it's a challenge function, right? Make sure that you're buying the right stuff and that you're being a responsible steward of the organization's money. Two, it's a customer of a potential AI solution, right? So folks with CFO backgrounds on this call, I mean, there are things that you can use AI for. Tom, you alluded to a couple of them. I hope that I alluded to a couple of useful ones in the presentation as well. And then three, I see you guys as owners of critical repositories. When we think about the algorithms and the accelerators, odds are you aren't going to own either of those, but you are going to own the data. And who in the organization is going to own the most valuable data? It's going to be probably somebody in product and somebody in the office of the CFO. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that this can't be driven by technologists, because guess what? Companies don't use technology for its own sake. We use it to accomplish a particular task that is usually unrelated to the technology itself. People don't go to McDonald's because the POS works, but they wouldn't go to
Mhm.
McDonald's if the POS didn't work, right? In IT, we say, everything's working. Why do we pay you? And nothing's working. Why do we pay you? It's a serious issue. So on your point, Brendan, about sort of where we go from here, well, you can absolutely get in touch with me. My email is jeroberts@infotech.com, and you can find it on this invitation, and I'd be more than happy. Brendan, if you wouldn't mind, you can feel free to share out the slides.
Yeah.
Um,
Just while you're speaking, I'm going to just put up a bit of a strategy roadmap workshop from Infotech there,
Wonderful.
so people can see at the high level what's involved in putting together a AI strategy roadmap. So yeah, this is an Infotech guided implementation
Yep.
system. So as you said, Jeremy, there's there's the do-it-yourself thing, download it and work with it, your team, or Infotech or anybody on this call can probably help you to put together a strategy. We all have expertise in that area. So if you're looking for a tutor or a mentor or a guide along this path, then please reach out.
A professional meeting host.
Yes, exactly. Or a
More
soda
than happy.
aficionado.
There you go. That's exactly right. I consider myself a resident of Teams. That's what I put down for tax purposes. So yes, this is an example of an agenda. We have a whole bunch of different ones. I encourage you to check out our website, infotech.com. Click through to our AI options, and there's 4 main ones, and we've got a whole bunch of related ones. And if any of those seem interesting at all to you, we're more than happy. Otherwise, please take the presentation that we've presented today as our gift to you for attending. Thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And I know that we hope to hear from you, and I hope you found it helpful.
Great. Thanks very much, Jeremy. We're up on time. So thanks very much, Tom. Thanks very much, Nick. If anybody who's on the call or listening when we post this on YouTube afterwards wants to get in touch, please feel free to reach out to any of the people on the call. We will put their details up on every piece of collateral that we send out. So thanks very much, everybody, for your participation. Thanks for joining, and we'll leave it at that.
Yep. Have a great morning, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers. Beautiful.